Hi there. Great you could join us. Believe it or not, this is the week where we have gone back into the sanctuary, but you have the opportunity here to catch up on the sermon on our worship resources on our website. So we've come to Palm Sunday, but we've kick-started the Easter story quite early. So we've gone into John 19, which is really about the story of Jesus dying on the cross, which is early here, but we'll probably be dealing with the resurrection next week on Easter Sunday. So, here's a question. Do you have any good storytellers in your family? Oh, if not, well, do you have a favourite drama programme where you just love those twists and turns in a plot and just the way they focus on the story? You know, what is it that they actually choose to focus on in that drama? Why do they pick and choose the details to get our attention? What details do you remember from a story that you've been told? And why do you think they were selected to capture your attention? You know, we've continued through the past few weeks while doing our online worship, looking at the signs of John and how they point to the really big sign of how we probably frame it as Holy Week and what we consider as Easter. You know, I've said before, John takes up half of his gospel story to think about the last stretch of Jesus' life around the Easter story. Of all the 33 years of Jesus' life here on earth, John takes time to look at this part of Jesus' life more than any other. Why? Simply, well, I think maybe it changed his life. Everything else is window dressing by comparison. It's like he's taken a zoom lens and focused on something out of all the landscape, and he's saying to those looking on, this is where I want you to put your attention. This is what I want you to focus on. And he does this for the first readers of the Gospel, but it's the same for us too. Let's take a look at what he's asked us to look at more closely. Today, it's the detail of what's going on around the cross of Jesus. And there's three things I've spotted under the magnifying glass. One, the notice posted on the cross by Pilate. Two, Jesus calls John to take care of his mother. And three, there are details in the story that only make sense to John later on. So why did he focus on these, on what was a momentous and horrendous day? We need to remind ourselves that this was written about Jesus from John's perspective, speaking into a church community that he was responsible for, most likely around Ephesus, with lots of satellite churches dotted around it. A time when the Roman Empire was still very much in sway, where every Christian would be experiencing the oppression of the Romans. The gospel story landed on the doormat of the Morning Post during a time when the church thought God's work would be sorted out much faster, but it seemed to be taking longer. They were living in a world where it was hard to make sense of where this was all going. Different beliefs dotted here and there of all these different gods, different loyalties for Caesar, for the local authorities, different lifestyles. How do we live in all of this? In other words, it was a world in some respects that's not too dissimilar to our own. We have people who have total disregard for our faith, but even more plainly put, we have people who have little regard for other people or other human beings. I work in the area of slavery and human trafficking, trying to address and raise awareness about that and the sort of human plight that we're facing today more than any other time. Immigration issues and hostility in terms of racism. Fighting over a vaccine that needs to be administered to all. Global climate issues impacting on others that we don't have a clue about. We are living in a world where we might have thought, not so much when's Jesus going to come back, but more there were issues that we've probably faced in our youth that are still here today. We may have imagined a better world and making a difference, but in our latter years it's not worked out the way we hoped. We might have thought the church might be at the centre of all this, and yet it's on the margins. And so we ask, why is it not being fixed sooner than we thought? We live in a world where we're still trying to make sense of it. There's so many faiths, lifestyles, values, twists and turns in circumstance that we didn't expect. Betrayal, disappointment, regrets, and so the list goes on. What's remarkable though is that we focus on the cross here and look at what initially appears incidental details, but they begin to speak into how to look at the world and then begin to see how the first followers saw those details for themselves that were being asked of by John, of his readers, to look at this world and start reading the story in a way that will make us look at our lives in a different way. You see, the first detail that John focuses on is the callousness of these soldiers and the total disregard of Jesus by Pilate. For the Romans, this was another day at the office of oppression. Pilate labels Jesus the way he sees it. The soldiers just see it as an opportunity of the spoils of occupation. John was essentially saying, this is the world Jesus faced. This was the treatment he experienced at his death. John puts it with no veneer. We live in a brutal and cruel world. The church at the time of when this gospel was being written was entering into one of the most torturous and brutal persecutions that the church would ever face. But the Romans just saw the church as a threat and an easy scapegoat. John was saying to the followers, Jesus was not exempt from this either. Maybe we've had a rubbish week. Maybe the system we are part of, whether it's our work or health or education, has shortchanged us. And you've been left high and dry. And you're facing the brunt force of a system that doesn't seem to care. Well, in the lead up to Easter, we're reminded that we follow a God that has entered that world and has been at the sharp end of that world. He knows and he understands. We're not alone. The other detail that John focuses on is that what Jesus does with regards to his loved ones is really important. We see that in the way that he's not left his mother stranded. He puts his house in order. He hands Mary into John's safekeeping. Now, when we think of the wider story in the Gospel, we may not have been surprised to have read that Jesus dealt with this later on, because he was around longer. And no, he understands that he needs others have to have their affairs put in order. He needs to see beyond his own perspective. In one sense, that's surprising, but that's because we didn't ignore the spoiler alerts when we read the Gospel, do we? You see, loving your loved ones involves seeing what they need from their perspective. This is a moment where a mother thought she would never ever see her son alive again in this life. And Jesus meets that need. He does not shirk it, he addresses it. And John was writing to a church that needed to see their work as being here for the long run. There was false teaching going around. Well, we're not going to be here much longer, why bother? We need to be a church that is in the business of finishing well. And finishing well involves seeing how we can help, not just for the now, but also beyond for the future generations. We need to step back and take that long view. On March the 24th in 1980, Oscar Romero, a bishop in El Salvador, was gunned down while administering the Mass, and his words are quite telling on how to finishing well. This is what he says: "The kingdom is not only beyond our efforts, it's even beyond our vision. We accomplish in our lifetime only a tiny fraction of the magnificent enterprise that is God's work. Nothing we do is complete," which is another way of saying that the kingdom always lies beyond us. No statement says all that could be said. No prayer fully expresses our faith. No confession brings perfection. No pastoral visit brings wholeness. No program accomplishes the church's mission. No set of goals and objectives includes everything. That is what we are about. We plant a seed that will one day grow. We water seeds already planted, knowing that they hold future promise. We lay foundations that will need further development. We provide yeast that produces the effects far beyond our capabilities. We cannot do everything, and there is a sense of liberation in realising that. This enables us to do something and to do it very well. It may be incomplete, but it is a beginning, a step along the way, an opportunity for the Lord's grace to enter and to do the rest. We may never see the end results, but that is the difference between the master builder and the worker. We are workers and not master builders, ministers, not messiahs. We are prophets of a future not our own. Finishing well. The other detail that John focuses on is how he makes sense of the details, whether that's the seamless robe bartered by gambling soldiers, the bitter drink offered to Jesus to extend his misery, or the surprise timing of Jesus' death that cuts short the crucifixion process. John shows to the early church, by the way he tells the story, and how he sees that in the light of the scriptures he knows, that there he can make sense of what he sees and what he's experienced. And John is calling more than the first disciples to do that. He's calling us to do the same, to take comfort in our scriptures and allow it to speak into our lives on a daily basis. You see, we may not see or make sense of circumstances at the time, but when we look back and reflect through the filter of God's words, and to use them then to have solace and peace, can be a discovery. John was empowering God's people to do the same as he looked back on one of the worst days of his life, when Jesus was ripped from them and they saw their master, his beloved, endure the unimaginable. We may have days like that. And some of us may have faced that this week. But take comfort. God's words endure into our lives and give us purpose once more. Remember this. We live in a world that doesn't just care, but is cruel. Jesus lived in it, and he knows it. We live in a world where we need to finish well, that our legacy is beyond the grave, and our loved ones need to continue it. Jesus did. We live in a world that doesn't make sense at the time, but looking back through God's eyes, we see his purpose at work. The Word made flesh gives us that purpose. God bless and take care.